And we're live to this. Right. So Mitch McConnell just came out from a more than an hour-long lunch with Senate Republicans and was asked by a reporter from CNN, when you campaign in 2018, how are you going to explain that you have wasted 7 months trying to repeal Obamacare but have come up empty? Mitch McConnell's answer was fascinating. First, he said, well, actually, it's 6 months. And secondly, he said, well, we have a Supreme Court justice. And that is one of these moments where you just throw the window up and you can see directly into the mind of Mitch McConnell. That is the thing that matters to him. You know, he sat on the Neil Gorsuch nomination in 2016. He sat on it all the way through the campaign. Not Neil Gorsuch, sorry. What was it, Merrick Garland? He sat on the Merrick Garland nomination all the way through 2016. He got Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court instead, and he's done. He's happy. And he thinks that should be enough to satisfy the Republican base as well, or at least the Republican donor base. There are a lot of people out there who are watching this crashing and burning of TrumpCare, of Obamacare repeal and replace, and they're having flashbacks to the House. And they're saying, this can't possibly be the end, because remember last time when Paul Ryan pulled the bill and he didn't have the votes, and everybody celebrated, then in the dead of the night, a week later, they came out and they rushed it through and boom, they passed Obamacare. Isn't that going to happen again? No, that's not going to happen again. And let's, if you have any questions about this process, put them in the Facebook comment thread. Eric will read them and ask them here, or Stacy will. But here's what's different. When the House bill failed, Donald Trump lost it, and started. If you remember, he started attacking the Freedom Caucus on Twitter relentlessly, saying the Freedom Caucus betrayed conservative principles. They're the ones that are standing in the way of Obamacare getting repealed. I made this promise, and it's the Freedom Caucus that is breaking it. That wasn't true. Donald Trump doesn't understand how Congress works, and he's enabled in that ignorance by his advisors, who kind of refuse to tell him how things actually work. They don't want him to blow up at them, fire them, do anything else erratic. The reality was the votes were not there in the House for a repeal bill because you had too many moderates that wanted it this way, moderates, we'll call them moderates, and you had too many Tea Party folks that wanted it the other way. Once the Tea Party started getting just lambasted by Trump on Twitter, they clearly made a calculation. They said, look, let's just vote for something. It's not going to pass the Senate anyway. Let's just vote for any piece of paper that we can put our name on, punt it over to the Senate side, let Mitch McConnell deal with it, let it be his problem, and then get Trump off our back. And by getting Trump off our back, then there's no risk that we get some Trump-inspired primary and we lose our seats. So they got a couple of moderates together. They sat down with the Freedom Caucus. Mark Meadows crafts his deal, and they write a completely unworkable bill. There's nobody who has looked at that bill who has thought that it would be anything other than a complete catastrophe if it were implemented and would just blow up the health insurance system. Just the other day, the trade groups for the insurers came out and said that the Senate version, which is rather similar, would basically destroy the healthcare system. I mean, it's so poorly written. Democrats took more than a year to write the Affordable Care Act, and they made a ton of stupid mistakes in there. Some of them were ideologically driven because they were too cheap. They didn't want to invest enough in healthcare. They wanted to keep it under this magic $1 trillion mark. Others is just, it's hard. You're rewriting a fifth or a sixth of the economy, and you're going to make mistakes. McConnell and Paul Ryan basically are doing it in a matter of weeks, so they're going to make huge mistakes. But it didn't matter because they didn't intend for it to become law. So they assume you bring it over here to the Senate side, which is where we are now, that it's going to fail there, and so we don't care. In other words, the same thing is not going to repeat itself here because everyone on both sides realizes that it was an unworkable solution, and the closer that it gets to becoming law, the more that starts to matter. If it's just a theoretical exercise, like President Obama is sitting in the White House and he's going to veto your bill, then go ahead, have 70 repeal votes. It's a cost-free vote. It's basically like putting out a press release. You're making a statement about where you stand on something, and it's not going to have any impact on the real world. But now that the House has passed something and the Senate was beginning to think about taking it up, then all of a sudden it starts to matter. If you pass this, it's getting a little scary. You might actually accidentally turn some of this into law. And so you had a number of moderates who started to express some concern, as well as a number of extreme conservatives who expressed concern. So Mitch McConnell sat down with both sides, and he made a decision. His decision was to lean into the right wing of the party and cut the legs out from underneath the moderates. Ironically, the people that finally killed it were still extreme conservatives. Mike Lee, certainly one of the most conservative senators here, and Jerry Moran, who is somewhere between a conservative and an extreme conservative. He's a senator from Kansas. I think in his particular case, he stunned a lot of people by his reluctance to get behind this, but you have to remember, he lives in Kansas. Kansas has undergone a kind of radical conservative experiment over the last several years in which they dramatically slashed taxes and spending and effectively destroyed their public education system and destroyed all kind of public trust in government. Governor Brownback's approval rating is somewhere around 12. It's a complete, the conservative experiment was a complete disaster. And so Moran watched that unfold. Rural hospitals in Kansas are all hanging by a thread. It's quite possible that he saw some of that. So they come out simultaneously and say, we're not going to vote for this. That killed it. The reason they both came out at the same time is then you can't point at any single one of them and say, well, this guy killed it, because they both did. It's how in firing squads, they put blanks in some of the rifles so that the executioners aren't sure that they just shot somebody in the head. They can tell themselves, well, I probably had the rifle that had the blank. My day job is not killing people, even if they actually did have the rifle that had the bullet in it. Anyway, that's Monday. So Tuesday, today, McConnell last night says, you know what, we're just going to do repeal without the replace. That's what Donald Trump wants. That's what we're going to do. And I think this was a rare instance of a Senate Majority Leader just teaching the President a little lesson. This is what you want, Mr. President? Fine. This is what we're going to do. The lesson didn't stick. Trump on Twitter today said, well, what we really need to do is get rid of the filibuster so that there's only a 50-vote threshold for these types of actions. Hey, guy, pay attention here. None of this requires 60 votes. You only needed 50. Think about that. The guy who is in charge of trying to get the votes to get this through the Senate doesn't know how many votes he needs. And it's not like he doesn't know in the background whether he needs 5 or 6 from this element of the caucus. It's that he doesn't know how many he needs. He needs 50 plus Mike Pence. That's what he needed. Maybe somebody told him he needs 60. Maybe he's being lied to. Maybe he needs better advisors. Whatever. He's out on Twitter saying we need to move from 60 to 50. So Mitch McConnell had now given Donald Trump what he wants. Today you have Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Shelley Moore Capito, 3 moderate-ish Republicans, all say that they're not even going to vote to move forward on a debate on repeal. They only have 52. In fact, they have 51 because John McCain is recovering from surgery. They lose those 3 women, then they lose it. Notice that I believe they have 5 women in their conference, and 3 of them came out publicly to kill McConnell's bill, which has its own interesting irony to it. Shelley Moore Capito's statement today began, "I did not come to Washington to hurt people." This is a Republican talking about Mitch McConnell's own bill, a bill that she herself has voted for dozens of times as a House member and a Senate member, but those were fake votes because they knew Obama was going to veto it. So what did Mitch McConnell say? Also, this is how you know whether or not there's going to be some zombie that comes back to life. Mitch McConnell was asked, okay, what are you doing next? And he said, we're going to have some hearings about the crisis that is Obamacare. Maybe something will come out of that. We're going to move on to tax reform. We're going to move on to infrastructure. The American people have a lot of work that they want us to do, and we're ready to tackle that. In other words, he is desperately ready to move on. He was ready to move on from this months ago before it became a zombie and came back to life in the House. Now he is actually ready to move on, but he is moving on bloodied and extremely damaged. This is kind of a history-making day here in the Senate. Affordable Care Act is the law of the land. The push for single payer is only getting more and more momentum, as a lot of Republicans were talking about today even. But happy to take any questions.
All right, so we basically have the entire comment section asking about this. We got Janet, Chet, Jake, John, Fabrice. We have a lot of people. So they're asking about single payer. So what impact is this going to have on federal single payer? And before you answer that, can you kind of clarify the difference between single payer and universal?
Sure. So, and I actually talked to a number of Republican senators today about single payer to get their take on this. So, universal health care would be like, let's say the Affordable Care Act worked the best way that you could possibly imagine, and it covered 100% of the American public through whatever devices and mechanisms it did. That would leave you with universal coverage. And so sometimes people talk about, conflate single payer and universal health care, but they don't necessarily mean the same thing. Universal could be some giant patchwork of systems from private insurance to VA to Medicaid to Medicare, TRICARE, different systems on different reservations, et cetera, et cetera. Single payer would be the insurance industry is basically wiped out, and there is one single payer, and that is the federal government. Unless you did it at a state level, then the single payer would be at the state of California or the state of Alabama. Now there are all kinds of versions within that people could debate whether or not they're single payer. In other words, if all the money comes from the federal government and they contract it out to middlemen to make the payments, that to me is still single payer. The payer and the person doing the negotiating are the same. It's the federal government. Now, a lot of people talk about Medicare for all as kind of a proxy for, you have to support Medicare for all if you want to support single payer. I actually think the world might be a better place if we had Medicaid for all. Medicaid has far better benefits. If you talk to somebody who's on Medicaid and talk to somebody who's on Medicare, you'll find that you pay far less out of pocket on Medicaid than you do on Medicare. There's a reason that there's this thriving market for kind of private Medicare supplemental plans. And so if you have Medicare for all, do you ban these private supplemental plans? And if you don't, then you're going to have people coming out of pocket for 10-20% of their medical costs, which is kind of the opposite of the point of single payer, because now you have a single payer plus all of these individual payers paying. So that's a debate kind of for another day. But today, I talked to Tim Scott from South Carolina, Marco Rubio, a couple other Republicans, and asked them about single payer. Some of them actually I think Marco Rubio even just brought it up unprompted on his own. And he said, the failure of this Obamacare repeal effort does is it gives more energy to the single payer movement. And he was saying that not in a positive way. He said he hears privately from a lot of his kind of friends who are on the Democratic side about the intense pressure that they're feeling to back single payer, and I thought that was an interesting thing for him to share with the reporters here in the Capitol. So in other words, Democrats, kind of rank and filed Senate Democrats, are telling their friends who are on the other side of the aisle, like, look, this is where the politics are in my party right now. I am feeling the heat. I am feeling like I need to make some type of public statement in favor of single payer if I'm going to stay in the good graces of the Democratic base right now, which is, an extraordinary place to be from where the party was just 8-10 years ago, when single payer kind of wasn't even allowed to be discussed as part of the debate about creating the Affordable Care Act. So As Sean Spicer said it, he said the choice is not between repeal and keeping Obamacare. The choice is between repeal and Bernie Sanders' single payer. Sean Spicer meant that to be a threat. There are a lot of people who would like to see that as a promise.
So kind of to follow up on that perfectly, Marty Hicks is asking, so when is Bernie's single payer going to be on the table, and how can we get this through the Senate?
Marty, as long as Mitch McConnell is Senate leader and Paul Ryan is the House Speaker, it's simply not going to happen. I asked Tim Scott, for instance, and Marco Rubio both, if any of the people that they meet in the grassroots conservative movement are even open to the idea of single payer. They laughed. Like to them, that's an absolute non-starter. The polling is weird on this. You can actually find some populist support on the right for a single payer. Certainly in Europe, you see it all over the place. The fascist parties in Europe are for single payer. That's not necessarily where we are now. As long as Mitch McConnell is majority leader and Paul Ryan is speaker, you're not going anywhere. So I don't know if it's a first step, but it is a necessary step that either the Republican Party completely transforms itself or Democrats retake power. And the action that needs to take place underneath all of that is taking place within the party, so that when the Democratic Party eventually does take power, that you have all of these different senators and House members on the record in favor of single payer, whether it's Medicare for all, Medicaid for all. You can work out details there. I think the way it's going to push forward will be first, at the state level. Nevada passed Medicaid for all, which is kind of a Medicaid opt-in. Like, it wasn't like everybody had to have Medicaid, but if you wanted Medicaid, then you could get it. Now the Republican governor there, Sandoval, vetoed it, but those are the types of you obviously have the push in California and New York going as well. Those are the types of efforts you're going to continue to see. I think that the next step is a gradual expanding of these public health care choices. These are, like, Medicare is a single payer. Medicaid is a single payer. So, there is a lot of energy around the idea that right now, if you're 65, you can get it, you get Medicare. Why does it have to be 65? Why not 60 or 55 or 50? And so you start kind of expanding it down that way. Meanwhile, you take Medicaid, which you have the precedent for expanding it through Obamacare. We realize it's popular. It just faced a full frontal assault from everything the Republicans had to throw at it, and it survived. So you expand that further. Instead of 400% of poverty, 1,000% of poverty, you can get access to Medicaid. And you just start kind of creeping closer and closer and closer and closer until you're looking at, okay, now 90% of the country is covered either by the VA, by TRICARE, by Medicaid, by Medicare, by CHIP. The S-CHIP debate comes up again in this fall. Then you're very close to where you need to be. So I think those are the parallel fights that are going on, and they need to be engaged in on all different levels.
Real quick, Ryan, we gotta go. So
Okay.
Mitch McConnell said there's going to be repeal only. What do you predict the vote will be on that? What would be the consequences?
I mean, it's a good guess what the vote will be. We know it's going to fail now, because we know that McCain won't be there. We know that the three, Shelley Moore Capito, Collins, and Murkowski are against us. So they start with 52. That takes them down to 48. Dean Heller said he doesn't know what he's going to do. Rob Portman has said he doesn't know what to do. So let's say they're no's. That takes you down to 46. Rand Paul has said that he's open to doing it. He had been one of the skeptics before. There are a number of others who could plausibly come out of the woodwork too, and be no votes on this. So you're going to wind up, somewhere in the mid to low 40s probably, which will be, deeply ironic, given that, Trump has insisted that if you just cut it down to a 50-vote threshold that you'd pass it. And the next tweet you'll see from Trump is why isn't there a 40-vote threshold here in the Senate? You know what? If they put a 40-vote threshold up, you'd see it drop down into the 30s, because that's how resistant a lot of these Republicans are to it actually becoming law, because they know what a catastrophe it would be for the people in their states, and the people in their states would take it out on them. So, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you again pretty soon.